the City of Bloomington Board of Zoning Appeals for January the 23rd, 2020. Call roll, please.
Here.
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 Okay. We have a set of minutes to be approved from November 2019. I will entertain a motion.
21st. I move approval of minutes from November 21st, 2019.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. Can I have a vote, please?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. You heard me, right? You heard me? Yes?
Yes.
Oh,
He wasn't here.
yes, I'll abstain since I
He'll abstain.
have no context for whether those minutes are accurate or not. So I abstain, thanks.
Okay.
No, he wasn't.
He wasn't
He wasn't
present.
here, so.
Okay. It's a little hard to hear you, Carmen. That's okay. Yeah. Okay. Reports, resolutions, and communications. I just want to recognize first that we have Brad Whistler with us this evening. He is the alternate for planning, so we will see him from time to time. So thank you for joining us this evening. And Flavia Burrell will be the new the designated planning representative on BZA for the coming year.
Yes, the new Plan Commission representative to the Board of Zoning.
Plan Commission, thank you. Thank you. Any reports, resolutions, and communications?
No.
No. Okay. First thing we have to do is elect officers for this year. I will entertain a motion for president.
I move Barry Clapper for president.
Second.
I would accept that nomination. So could we have roll call, please?
Throckmorton,
Yes.
Husky,
Yes.
Whistler,
Yes.
Clapper.
Yes. Okay. Nomination for vice president.
Yeah, that's fine.
I nominate Joe Throckmorton for Vice President of BZA.
A second?
Second.
Okay. We have a vote, please.
Yes. Clapper,
Yes.
Husky,
Yes.
Whistler,
Yes.
Throckmorton.
Yes.
Okay, we're set for 2020. The petitions that will be continued to February 2020, the only petition is AA-41-19, Judy Baker and David Holdman. And petitions withdrawn are V-17-19, City of Bloomington, and UV-V-31-19, Rimrock Companies. The petitions we'll be hearing this evening are UV-26-19, Kimberly Carballo, V-44-19, Randall McLaughlin, and AA-45-19, Tariq Khan. And without further ado, we are ready to hear the staff report for the first petition, please.
Thank you. This petition is for the property located at 1300 South
Okay,
Lincoln.
yeah, we're having a really hard time hearing over here before you get started.
It doesn't
sorry
sound
to
like
jump
it's
in.
on. It doesn't
Yes,
sound like
just-
it's on.
Not loud enough.
Is it on now?
Is that anything? Yes. that
Yes,
was it.
thank you.
That's a weird one.
Okay, we're
Yay.
set.
All right. This petition is for the property located at 1300 South Lincoln, located in the Bryant Park neighborhood. The 5,277 square foot property has been developed with a one-story single-family residence with an accessory structure along the south or west property line. The property and all surrounding properties are zoned within the residential core district. Each of the surrounding properties have been developed with single-family dwellings. The petitioner is requesting a use variance to allow the raising of livestock, 2 goats in the residential core district. The petitioner currently has 2 goats on the property. The property has a fenced-in backyard and an accessory structure which is used for the raising of the goats. The property widths along the east and west property lines are 40 feet and 132 feet along the north and south property lines. Crops and pasturage is not an approved use in the RC district. Livestock are only permitted to be kept in residential estate district upon meeting special conditions. Eligible RE properties must meet a minimum of 5 acres. Pasture shall be limited to 1 animal unit per acre. Goats are considered half an animal unit. Structures containing livestock or livestock waste must meet a setback from the front property line of a minimum of 75 feet and 50 feet from side property lines. The area highlighted here in red is the approximate area of the goats that the goats are able to utilize. The goats are limited by a fenced-in backyard and have access to the accessory structure. The department finds that there are negative impacts to public health and safety of the community. Close proximity animal waste is a potential public health risk to surrounding residents. The UDO allows livestock to be kept in the RE district only once special conditions have been met. The property, this property is less than 1/8 of an acre and is significantly smaller than the required minimum of 5 acres for maintaining livestock, and does not allow for the 1 acre of dedicated pasturage. Additionally, structures associated with raising of livestock are required to meet minimum setbacks from front and side property lines. The current structure is set back 0 feet from the western side property line and 14 feet from the south side property line and 5 feet from the north front property line. The size of the property does not adequately allow for livestock and livestock waste to be located safely away from surrounding residents. The department finds adverse impacts associated with the proposed use variance. The sight, sounds, smells, etc. of livestock are not customary in small lot urban residential neighborhoods. These nuisances could contribute to the loss and value of adjacent properties. The department has received several letters of support from local residents that have been included in the packet, as well as 3 calls in support and 1 in opposition. The department finds no peculiar condition on the property which would cause the need for this variance. The property was developed with a single-family dwelling, which is the intended use in the RC district. The yard and primary structure were developed with single-family residents and their activities in mind, and can easily support those activities, continue to support those activities. The department finds that strict application of the terms of the UDO will not constitute as an unnecessary hardship if applied to this property. The size of the property is not sufficient to safely raise livestock according to the UDO. Parcels within the RC district were not intended to host a livestock, and this parcel could easily continue to operate as a single-family residence. Okay, sorry. The department finds that oh, that's the same one. Okay, sorry about that. The department finds that this proposal does meet some of the goals of and policies of the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan states that urban agriculture should be supported and not hindered by local regulation. The comprehensive plan calls for assessment and possible creation of permitted agricultural uses within non-agricultural zoned districts. This petition would allow for exactly that, as the comprehensive plan has identified this property as a mixed urban residential area. And finally, policy 3.8 of the comprehensive plan gives guidance to promote and protect local food culture in Bloomington's food system. This petition would promote local food system, as the goats are capable of producing fertilizer and other agricultural uses such as milk for human consumption. Based on the written findings of the staff report, the department recommends the adoption of the proposed findings and the denial of UV 2619.
Representative, would you please state your name?
Kim Carballo.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
You have up to 20 minutes to present your petition.
Okay, thank you. I'll not re-present the materials that I brought up when this petition came the first time, just as a reminder that the considerations for space are very different for dwarf and pygmy goats than they are for full-size goats. So according to Story's guide, which is sort of the bar setting for this particular animal care, the space is sufficient. It's actually several times more than the minimum space that they recommend. And I understand that the city needed to follow up with the same arguments that it had before, but it is my understanding that the UDO was amended to consider animals by size, in other words, by height and weight, rather than simply by species. Given that these animals are smaller than many of the large dogs that regularly walk by my house, I hope that that will be enough just on its own merit to allow the petition. But just to reiterate from the previous conversation, the goats aren't injurious, and they don't have a negative effect on the neighbors. Their neighbors actually wrote to that effect. Many of these same arguments were previously applied to chickens, but with the being able to set a number limit and other regulations on how to care for the chickens within the city, then that has worked out fine, and I think a similar approach could be taken with the goats. And finally, as noted before, this would allow support of the comprehensive plan and would move towards urban farming and a more compact and productive food chain. Thank you for your consideration.
For questions of the petitioner or staff? You're more than welcome to start.
Sure. Yeah, I wonder if staff could just give us an update on how the new UDO will impact this. I know that we did make some changes in the UDO to the way that we regulate livestock, and I don't recall if City Council made any additional changes when it got to the council, but would this current situation still be in violation of the new UDO once it goes into effect?
Yeah, so the Plan Commission did make a change which would address the size of the goats, but not the size of the property. So this property would still fail to meet the minimum 1 or half acre pasturage requirement. So it also, the new UDO expanded the use to an accessory use in all single-family districts, not just the RE district. So that was what the board was waiting on last time. So it did expand, it just didn't expand to this particular case.
So once the new UDO goes into effect, this would be permitted if it were on a half-acre lot in
Correct.
the same zone. So
Correct.
really, that's really kind of the question at hand, is whether or not we want to allow this on a smaller lot than is permitted. It's not what it would be permitted within the same zone if it were a larger lot.
It would no longer be a use variance, it would be a development standards variance, and it would require several other variances, including the setbacks for the accessory structure, but potentially you could review it under that.
Okay, thanks.
You feel free, if you have further questions?
Do you have any other comments on
Well,
that?
hold on a second. The way
Did
the
you-
process works is we'll come back to her for the remainder of her time if there's additional
Well,
comments.
but you can ask
He
question.
can address a question.
You can ask a question
But that's not
to the
what was happening. So I
petitioner.
just want to make that clear. If you
Yeah,
have a
yes,
question
sir.
for her, yes, please.
Well, yeah, you'll have a chance to comment, I think, on that shortly then.
Sure. Okay. Any other questions at this time?
Yeah, I have a question about, staff mentioned that this use supported the idea of urban agriculture and local food processing. It looks like that definition, of course, I'm looking at the original UDO and the comprehensive plan, only addresses plant cultivation and crops and doesn't actually specifically says not include the raising of animals, shall not include. So how has that changed? or?
So, yeah, it does specifically mention that it was just a broader sense of the fertilizer aspect we thought could address the crops portion. So,
Okay.
yeah, that portion was a bit of a stretch, but we thought was closely related that it should be considered.
Okay, thank you. And one other question about that. With regard to all of the neighbors' letters and how to consider those in our decision-making, would it be basically that the neighbors are standing up and saying it's not injurious to the general welfare? Would that be how we might frame the use of those letters?
Yeah, so they would be in affront to our claim that it is injurious.
I'm sorry, I can.
They would be in opposition to us claiming that it is injurious if you
Okay.
were to consider their claim.
Okay, I understand now. Thank you. That's all.
I have a clarification, but we're hearing this petition now under the current code. The new UDO is not yet in place, correct?
Yes.
So we're bound by the previous definition of livestock and pasturage. I remember that was part of the issue.
Yes, correct. You're bound to the existing code.
Okay. So when the changes were made, when the changes will be made in the new UDO, the issue, these animals don't require pasture. So it will just be a weight-based criteria at that point?
So yes and no. Because they don't require pasturage, that was actually language from the current code, not the new UDO. The new UDO has removed the only counted in pasturage context language, but they still require pasturage regardless of the size or number of units of animals. So it's still the current, or the new code will require half an acre of pasturage for medium livestock, which is what these goats would qualify as. The exact language is hybrid or miniaturized medium livestock.
I'm having trouble hearing you, Ryan. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. That's my fault. So these goats that the petitioner has would be hybrid or miniaturized medium livestock. So they would still be required to have half an acre of pasturage regardless of their being hand-fed or not.
Okay. Okay.
A question
Okay.
for the staff, please, on item number 1, the approval, not injurious to the public health. I want to be clear, again, in support of the President's comment that we are operating off the current UDO and not the new one. However, because the new UDO is essentially going to go into effect, I'm no longer going to object to questions about that, as I have in the past. That's an aside. I do want to make sure that I understand about the proposed finding about the close proximity of animal waste is a potential health risk to the surrounding residents. That was the first finding. That finding will be consistent now and with the changeover to the new UDO. Is that correct?
Correct. That is the reason for the minimum lot size.
Okay, and just to be very clear, what's the minimum setback currently?
So
if this were actually in the residential estate?
There would be no required setback except for the accessory structure, which would be 75 feet behind the front property line and 35 feet from side and rear.
Okay, and the current building is, what's the setback?
It's 0 on one side and then roughly 5 from the front property line.
Okay. And even if they were able to move the building, there's not that much space in that area in order to move it away to the proper setback. Is that correct?
Correct, yeah. The accessory structure wouldn't be able to meet.
And just as a follow-up, would you feel that the exposure to waste product perhaps is the main concern that the city is expressing here? I'm asking you, it's an opinion.
No, yeah, sorry. there was an addition. But yes, correct, that is one of the two major concerns. The other concern is the potential harm to the animals themselves. But yes, the largest concern was association with animal waste.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, I have another question.
Sure.
It appears as though, I think you guys can answer this, the fence runs right along the property line right now. Is that the case, or is there actually some space between the fence line and the property line?
I do believe the fence goes right up to the property line.
Right on, up to the property line. Okay, thank you.
So, for staff, so this is a use variance. Under the new code, there wouldn't be an opportunity for this petitioner to come back, because it's still related to use, or I'm just curious, if the situation changes where we would be looking at it rather than a use, more of a development variance situation.
Yeah, exactly that. The use variances are no longer an option in the new UDO, so this would be a development standards variance, in addition to the fact that it's an accessory use in the structure, or in the district, so it would just need to meet, or it would need a variance from the setbacks and the minimum lot size, things like that.
I see.
Because the use has been added to the
Because the use
district.
is added.
Yes.
Even though it wouldn't be allowed in this category, like in what is it going to be, R3, R4?
Yeah, it would be R3 in a conversion, a
Okay.
direct conversion, and it would be allowed if it were to meet the minimums, or it would be allowed if it were to meet the requirements.
Okay, okay. Okay, any further questions? At this time? No? Okay. So then we go to the public. Is anybody here from the public who would like to speak to this petition? Anyone? Okay. Seeing no one, we are back to the petitioner. You have an opportunity to, for final comments or anything further. I'm sure you have a lot of time remaining.
Well, I certainly won't take all that time, but I would like to adjust just a few things that have come up. The fence doesn't actually, the fence runs a property line, but there is a garden that separates, and I think maybe that is part of what is the distance from the north fence corner back. There's a garden which is now fenced. So I don't know how to, without actually being able to draw on the thing, I don't know how to, can we see the other picture? Yeah, so you see where the red line sort of gerrymanders down. That's to allow for a garden which is fenced in and which the goats don't have access to. So that's why there's that distance to the property line there. And in terms of pasturage, I think the original standards were set from, it's my understanding, according to if they would need to graze. And since these don't need to graze, they don't need that pasture, but they are fed alfalfa and goat-specific food, and then the occasional birdseed treats, then that consideration of actually needing the amount of land that would grow enough grass for them to be able to eat, that's not really a consideration. So it really is about the space itself. And as I mentioned before, the space that is recommended by the industry, they have several times more than that particular amount of space. Regarding the waste, I absolutely do understand why this would be a concern, and of course I wouldn't want to be contaminating my neighbors or the streets or any of that. And I am very careful to keep it cleaned up. That, as I mentioned before, in the previous time when we talked, however, goat waste is actually called berries, and they're discreet. They don't. I don't know how to talk about waste in a public forum without being overly descriptive, but they don't splat. It's not like cow patties. They actually are. They keep to themselves. So it's easy to gather up. It's easy to contain. And if doing waste testing in the area surrounding the property would be useful, I'd be happy to do that. I'm also happy to be open for, what's it called? Not investigate, inspection. I'd be happy to welcome inspectors to come to the property and to see the level of care of the animals and to see how the waste is actually contained. As far as the setbacks go, then if we were to continue this until it is under the new UDO, then I would happily do whatever paperwork needs to be done to apply for a variance for the setbacks, or whatever else would make it palatable for the BZA. Could I answer any questions from you regarding the animals or their care or shelter?
During the comments.
Yeah, afterward, in a moment, if we have any further questions.
Sure. Great, then I think that takes care of what I
Okay, if
needed
you
to
have any
say.
further comments at this time, no?
That's all, thank you.
Okay, sure. Okay, so we're back to the board for action, for discussion, action, and further questions.
So before discussion, I'll move denial of V-26-19 based on findings 1, 2, 3, and 4 as presented by staff.
Okay. Do I have a second?
It has to have a second before, or if it doesn't have a second, it dies, then we have to have another motion.
I'm going to second that.
You're going to second it? Okay. So let's discuss a few things. Okay. So I'm going to start. So you mentioned that this is a use variance. It has to be heard under the current code, and because it just simply won't exist into the future. Correct? The options for the petitioner in the future would be to come back with a developmental, could you speak to what the options would be?
Hi, Jackie Scanlon, Development Services Manager. Yes, so use variances will no longer be an option in the UDO after the effective date here in a couple months. We've been looking at, we've been trying to look at what the options are in general for small livestock in town where that's been less traditional, and then also in particular for this particular case, since we know that that's why you continued it initially, was to see what the options would be under the new UDO. As Ryan mentioned, crops and pasturage will be allowed as an accessory use in the likely new zoning here, which would be R3. And the issue is that there is a minimum acreage required for animals that are classified for the classification that these animals would fall under, that this lot doesn't meet. So that is a number that she doesn't meet for this parcel. So the request, there could be another request coming forward that would be a request for a development standards variance. And the findings are a little bit different. And for use variance, it's 5 findings, very stringent. For development standards variance, 3 of the same findings, also stringent, but I think the use variance is more difficult to prove usually. So yes, we could work with the petitioner in the future on that. We're a little bit hamstrung. Title VII of the Bloomington Municipal Code deals with animals mostly, and this type of animal is in a list of other types of animals that you definitely would not want, at your next door neighbor's house. We don't have code guidance to kind of take this out of a larger kind of livestock view. We were hoping to get that a little bit with the update, and we didn't get quite where we thought we were going to. So that's where we are. That would be the option going forward, to keep the animals on site.
Okay.
You got now.
To the petitioner, You mentioned, I was in the middle of reading a few things. You mentioned something about an inspector had been out, or you would welcome, tell me what you said there that I missed.
No, that I would be happy to welcome an inspector to come out in the same way that there's a chicken inspector or a.
Okay.
You know, I would be happy to have, or you all, if should you care to come, but definitely an animal welfare inspector to be sure that or a
Okay.
health inspector, like
Got it.
whatever needs to happen.
To the staff then, what type of inspector would be doing something like that?
So currently, there are particular rules in Title VII for chickens, for example, and we are not involved in that, so I'm not sure, but someone from the animal control, they are the ones who oversee that type of inspection, so I'm not sure if they do inspect chicken coops now, then it could be something similar here. The issue is for a variance having to prove that this lot is unique and needs the variance.
And the inspection would be specific to the health and safety of the animals, right? Something like
I
that?
believe that is how they do it,
With the
yes.
chickens?
Not positive.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions.
So before voting, just a couple of things. One, I want to explain that the motion was made because we have heard this before, and we were waiting to see kind of where things were going to go. And what it sounds like is there's not going to be a significant enough change between the current UDO and the upcoming UDO to grant variance. Now, should the motion tie or fail, I'm happy to entertain a second motion that will continue this again until the UDO is in full effect, therefore essentially taking this out of our jurisdiction as BZA and putting it back on to the homeowner to work directly with the city based on the new UDO. Just I'm saying that for the benefit of those on the board here. But that's the primary reason is this. I think the city's made or the staff has made a clear distinction that this property is not really built for this type of use. And while in this case there seems to be support, I don't think it's something that I can disregard the staff's recommendation to grant a variance.
Did anyone else have comments? I
Well,
want to
we
hear
can go
other
back to the
comments
meeting.
before I spoke.
Well, I would say that we will not be able to hear this indefinitely. We have to make a decision because it's based on the current code. This was filed under the current code. We have to hear it. There could potentially be other options in the future that will be up to the petitioner and what she chooses to do. So I think based on the information that we have at this time, I think I feel ready to make a decision based on how things are. And I don't know if continuing really this case makes any difference, another month or two.
Yeah, so this petition will have to be seen under this code, no matter when you make your final decision.
Right.
Oh, well, thanks for clarification.
Sorry about that, yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
it's
So given
confusing.
that, you can strike
Thank
my
you.
comment earlier.
Yeah, we have to make a determination.
I was hoping to put it back on the city.
Yeah.
But I do agree with the president's comments that we do have to make this decision. We've heard this before, and I think it was 6 months ago, roughly.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I certainly can understand the staff's recommendation. If you if you read sort of the criteria, is this particular property unique? It's not unique in the sense that the property itself proposes some unique constraint, but it certainly is unique in that the goats are already there, the neighbors love and support them, and to the point where we attempted to modify the code to to allow it. I think it sounds like we probably fell a little short in the legislative process of accommodating this, but there was a very clear sentiment of support for exactly this case. I think certainly amongst the neighbors and at the Plan Commission, and I don't want to speak for the council, but I believe even at council. So I certainly understand the staff's legal reading, but it seems clear to me that the spirit of everyone involved is that this isn't hurting anyone. In fact, it's a feature, not a bug, in the neighborhood here. So I'm happy to support a variance for this. I've been approached personally by some of the neighbors who are in support of it, and I understand that it doesn't quite meet the letter of the law here, but I think that's more a failure of the law than it is a failure of the homeowner here. So if we're considering a motion to deny, I will likely vote no on that motion.
I really have nothing to add. I feel like my colleagues have said everything. I pretty much agree with that.
I'll just follow up to my colleague, Mr. Whistler's comments. I would disagree that it's that no one has been harmed. No one has been harmed yet. I think that the regulations are in place to prevent that from happening. And I think overlooking such a drastic change, especially in the sizing requirements, is just us really going beyond kind of what a variance might really allow. It's such a drastic change in size that something could happen, whether it's waste related or the animal does something. We had those discussions before, and while there hasn't been a past incident, that doesn't mean there wouldn't be a future one. So I do think that I think planning in the past, and I think what you've done on the upcoming UDO has been to be thoughtful about what these regulations are there for. And I think that the current UDO and the new UDO both allow us as the BZA to make changes, but I just think, again, that this property is just not properly situated for this type of use. And I think it's a drastic change from the minimum requirements, and that's why I would make that, or that's why I did make that motion. But just to be clear about that difference of opinion on that case, I understand the sentiment and I appreciate the sentiment, but I think I would have a different feeling about this if the property was much larger. So I'm certainly sympathetic to it.
So I want to ask a question. It seems to me that the issue, so the size of the animals was addressed in the new UDO, but we're still what's critical in this case is this idea of pasturage, and that was what was grounding the findings in, under the current UDO, is this idea of pasturage. And the petitioner has argued that these animals don't require that this is an exception. It's not necessarily the weight, but it's really how these animals live and function. So in speaking to that issue, because to me that's where the disconnect is, for me in terms of what was not addressed, in that this type of animal seems to be an exception to other types of livestock who live off the land. So in your opinion, or could you give some advice as to how, in thinking about a variance, that could potentially factor in?
So while pasturage is the area where an animal grazes, it's also the area where the animal moves around, it lives its life, and it does its waste in. So the word may be focused on the food source of the animal. It's not necessarily the intent of the UDO. I believe the intent was to focus on the space being adequate enough for the size of the animal, which is why the size of the animal will change the amount of pasturage required. So it's not necessarily because they need the food source. They
Okay.
can be hand-fed or not.
So maybe I described it a little
Sorry.
bit too limited, because the information that we've gotten about these particular types of goats don't require that much land.
That's
Right.
absolutely true for this type of goat, according to
Right.
the facts we have.
And this
But
seems to be kind of a unique type of animal, or an animal that our code isn't specifically acknowledging.
correct.
Correct.
Yes.
So is there that type of unique circumstance in use? Could that be the basis of a variance? I mean, could that, do you see what I'm asking?
Sure, so, for a use variance, I mean, the 5, are here.
Yeah.
That you have to meet.
The approval does not interfere
The
with
5
sound.
requirements. So like number 3, for a use variance, the need for the variance arises from some condition peculiar to the property involved.
Right.
It's supposed to be that, the zoning code was written for rectangular lots, and you have some weird one-off, triangular, octagonal lot
Right.
that you can't meet the setbacks, and,
Sure.
that's
So it doesn't
really
speak
what.
to that issue, which
Right,
is
so
still one of
this
the
is more
criteria.
along the lines which we have, seen in other variance requests of that the user of the lot is unique, and that's why they are requesting a variance,
Right.
not because the lot is actually unique in any way. Yeah, so the findings for the development standards variance are going to be similar. So the third finding is going to be very similar. That basically, the lot isn't, it's not usable without the variance. So I mean, this lot is intended to be single family.
Sure.
It can go on being single family. I mean, we definitely feel for this issue. We've
Right.
talked about it
Right,
many
Right.
staff hours spent on trying to figure out what is the neighbors, we've received one complaint, and then, 11 or however
Sure.
many we understand that, that it doesn't seem to be an issue to the immediate neighbors right now. It's just not something that we feel like we can legitimize through the findings that are required at this point. So again, with the development standards variance, they are similar. That is something we kind of haven't explored too much, what the difference is. If the petitioner is saying that data shows that they actually only need X amount of space, but the code was written to cover a wide range of animals, and maybe that's not really needed. Maybe something we could explore, but again, that's less related to the lot than we like for variances to be.
right. Okay. Okay, so we are ready for a vote? Anybody have anything else? Okay. Roll call, please. So just to review, the motion is for denial based on the findings, so a yes
Yes vote is to deny.
is to deny.
Whistler,
No.
Pfeffer,
Yes.
Husky. Yes. Throckmorton.
Yes.
Okay, the petition is denied. Thanks. We are now on to the next case, V-44-19, Randall McLaughlin. Staff report, please.
This petition is for the property located at 621 North Lincoln. The roughly 3,300 square foot property has been developed with a detached single-family dwelling. The property and all surrounding properties are zoned within the residential multifamily district. Surrounding uses include a detached single-family dwellings and multifamily dwellings. The property fronts along both North Lincoln Street and East Cottage Grove Avenue. The petitioner is requesting variances from two different standards to allow for the construction of a deck. The first variance is from front building setbacks. The second variance is from the maximum impervious surface coverage. These photos are of the deck which the petitioner is requesting a variance for. The photos were taken from Cottage Grove Avenue facing south, and the photo on the right was taken from Lincoln facing west. On September 12th, 2019, the department issued a notice of violation to the petitioner for the deck, which encroaches into the front building setbacks and caused the property to be in excess of the maximum impervious surface coverage for the RM district. The UDO requires the RM district to be at, or properties in the RM district to be at or behind the front building setback of 15 feet from the right-of-way or block face average, whichever is more. The front building setback along North Lincoln was determined to be 22 feet from the right-of-way based on the block face average along North Lincoln. The front building setback along East Cottage Grove was determined to be 15 feet from the right-of-way, as the block face average was less than the 15 feet. The deck encroaches 6 feet and 2 inches into the front building setback along North Lincoln and the entirety of the 15 feet along East Cottage Grove. The steps of the deck encroach an additional 4 feet 3 inches into the front building setback along North Lincoln. The deck encroaches 12 feet and 5 inches into the front building setback along North Lincoln and 15 feet total along East Cottage Grove. The RM district allows the UDO maximum impervious surface coverage at 40% of the lot area. The lot area for this property is 3,310 square feet. Prior to the placement of the deck, 45% of the total lot was already covered by impervious surfaces. After the placement of the deck, 48% of the lot area has been covered by impervious surfaces. Injury is found with the requested variance from front building setbacks. The requested variance from front building setbacks will have negative impact on public space and public safety. The creation of the deck further increases the amount of structure directly adjacent to East Cottage Grove. This, along with the deck's 6-foot 2-inch encroachment into the front building setback along North Lincoln, may have negative impacts on pedestrian and vehicular traffic along those roads. Injury is also found in the request for the variance from maximum impervious surface. The creation of the deck reduces the green space on the property and brings the site further out of compliance. No adverse impacts to the use and value of the surrounding properties have been found as a result of the requested variance from the required front building setbacks. The deck does not encroach toward any adjacent properties and therefore should not negatively affect the value of those properties. No adverse impacts to the use and value of the surrounding properties have been found as a result of the requested variance from maximum impervious surface coverage. The lot was previously over the RM district maximum, and it should not affect adjacent properties. However, on July 16th, 2019, the department did receive a complaint about the deck from an adjacent property owner. No practical difficulties in the use of the property as a result of the strict application of the setback standards of the UDO are found. While decks are common building features on residential properties, they are incidental to the primary use. The property will continue to be used as a detached single-family dwelling. There are neither environmental constraints nor topographical challenges which prevent the property from meeting the terms of the UDO. As such, the requested variances will not alleviate any peculiar conditions on the property that limit its use. No practical difficulties in the use of the property as a result of the strict application of the impervious surface standards of the UDO are found. The site is currently in excess of the UDO maximum impervious surface allowances. Because of the deck, because this deck's construction would, because of this, the deck's construction would be limited. However, this limitation would apply to any increase of the maximum impervious surface coverage and is not unique to the construction of this deck nor the proposed use. The requested variances will not alleviate any peculiar conditions. Based on the written findings in the staff report, the department recommends the adoption of the proposed findings and the denial of V4419.
Okay, thank you. Petitioner? Please state your name.
My name is Mike Carmen, representing the petitioner, Randy McLaughlin.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. 20 minutes.
Randy couldn't be here tonight. He's traveling and did not want, this got delayed once before and did not want to delay it further. So he prepared a statement I'm going to read, and I'll have just a few additional comments after that. But tried to anticipate maybe things you might want to ask him about, and went ahead and tried to put it into a statement so you'd have his words on this. So this is Mr. McLaughlin's statement. My name is Randall McLaughlin. I own the property at 621 North Lincoln Street, Bloomington. I purchased the property in January 1986. The property had an existing one-story small structure of approximately 1,300 square feet. It is a limestone and vinyl exterior. The property is located at the corner of North Lincoln Street and Cottage Grove. The house is oriented so that the front door faces North Lincoln Street. The north side of the house is in close proximity to Cottage Grove. The original house is reported to have been built in 1930. Apparently, there were some upgrades or work done on the house in 1950. At the time the house was built, there was no existing zoning ordinance that established a side yard setback, or as I understand the definition now, because of the corner lot, what I see as a side yard is deemed a front yard for zoning purposes. Regardless, the house was built a couple of feet off of what is now the sidewalk along Cottage Grove, long before there was ever a zoning ordinance and any development standards. The house is a rental property. In my petition is a photograph of the structure that gives a good depiction of the entrance to the house. Would you go on? There's another, on the next picture, there's one that the house before the deck was added. There it goes. Thank you. You see the picture of the house now. This is obviously pre-deck. The deck's already been constructed. So this is this is about 4 years old, but you can see the front step there, the white door, and the steps that actually are a little below the level of the door. This is a door that's perched up. It's not a style of construction we see now. We see a more true split level. Here you have what amounted to a little bit of a split level with the lower level. You can see the window on the Cottage Grove side right next to that car for the lower level. So it created a little bit of a split level type approach by perching the house up, and now there's no landing. The steps stop a couple feet short, and you have to step up into the doorway. So back to Mr. McLaughlin's statement. In my petition is a photograph of the structure that gives a good picture of the entrance to the house. The picture demonstrates that the entry door is elevated above ground level. There are 4 concrete steps from ground level up to the door with no true platform or landing area. There's a small area on the top step, 1 step down from the level of the door, to stand and wait for the door to be opened. Tenants have not been a problem in this property, although on occasion there may be trash or clutter or chairs or other objects placed in the front yard by the tenants. I generally have managed the property myself, but in recent years I've used a property management company. I decided that the property would be better served and it would be an improvement to the property to construct a better staircase to the front door. I added a small deck and had the stairs constructed that brings the top step and the deck level with the front door entrance. The photograph of the property before the deck was installed shows the small projection of a room off of the southeast corner beside the front entrance door. The deck is 8 feet by 13 feet and largely filled in the area around the front door and provides a small area for what would be the equivalent of a small front porch. When I decided to add the deck, I called the building department and asked about a building permit. I was advised that a building permit was not required, and it isn't. Nothing was said about any other permits or approvals being required. I got the idea to add the deck by looking around the neighborhood. There are a number of properties scattered throughout the several blocks around it, and particularly the property 2 doors south on North Lincoln Street that have decks, porches, and wood stairs. The property 2 doors south of North Lincoln has added a staircase on the Lincoln Street side that is 2 stories leading to the second-story apartments. In any event, I looked around and saw several examples of staircases and decks that seemed to be clean, orderly, and added to the property and did not detract from it. Many of the decks or staircases that are visible on properties in the surrounding neighborhood are placed closer to the street than the steps that I have added to my property. The property 2 doors south of North Lincoln Street have steps that are placed within a couple of feet of the sidewalk. The steps I added to my property leading to the front door are more than 8 feet set back from the sidewalk. The property at 619 North Washington has a huge deck that seems to be constructed within 2 or 3 feet of the sidewalk along Cottage Grove. It's a great deck. I believe that it really added to the property. I have no doubt that the deck helps keep the property more orderly. While I do not live in the neighborhood, I have been through the neighborhood frequently to check on my property. I have never observed that the large deck on the Washington Street property contributes to any disruptive behavior or otherwise interferes with the pedestrian use of the sidewalk on Cottage Grove. The north side of the deck I added to my property is set several inches back from the property line, more than the existing limestone wall on the north side of the house. I did not ask anyone about the issues of impervious surface area or setback requirements. I was not aware of an issue called impervious surface. With regard to the setbacks, I did not ask, but I assumed that because I saw so many examples of properties with similar construction and many that were closer to the street than the additions I made to my property, that the deck and the stairs were not an issue. I was surprised to receive a notice that I was in violation of an ordinance. To the extent that the deck is close to the sidewalk in Cottage Grove, it is not as close as the existing wall that has been in place for decades. That's Mr. McLaughlin's statement. So several comments. First of all, there's some terms been thrown out that frankly, I object to. Mr. Roblin, in his comments, in his explanation, used the word unique. Unique is not a standard, it's not an issue for a design standards variance. It is for a use variance, but it is not an issue. In fact, there's nothing in this law or in the ordinance on design standards variance, development standards variance, that you'll find the word unique. Practical difficulties peculiar to property is not the same as unique. Unique really means one of a kind. But if you look in the staff there, you can see a lot of things in the staff report. I think it's page 35 is an overview of the, I call it the schematic of the neighborhood. Oh, you've renumbered, the pages are renumbered. Okay, that one's fine, thanks. That's the schematic. You can see that the red box is this property, 621 North Lincoln. Look on the east side of Lincoln Street. Every structure from 10th Street to Cottage Grove on the east side is built closer and existing now closer to the sidewalk than the steps and deck. And yet, this causes harm. The staff has made a finding that this causes injury. Every property south of this property on the west side of Lincoln Street down to 10th Street has structures, steps, and handrails closer to the sidewalk than these steps that are 8 foot back. And yet the staff report says these present injury to pedestrian use. And it is even with the deck, the steps, it's the furthest back from the sidewalk or the street of any structure in that block. And those are not, this is a problem of original construction. Those other properties, a couple of them, have had things added. If you look around, would you do the photographs I had, please? Thank you. This is the first one, obviously taken right at the corner, looking south toward 10th Street. Thank you. It's there in the trees there to the back of the photograph. You can see the red steps. Those are post-original construction steps and a second-story deck. It'll lead to second-story apartments in that property. And you see the steps come down. You can see from this photograph the contrast of how close those are to the sidewalk on Lincoln than what these steps would be. The staff finding is these present a risk of injury or interference with pedestrian use of the sidewalk. How? It's just not possible. Would you go to the next photograph, please? This is continuing on down past that property. Look at the steps, the handrail there, all right at the sidewalk. We're 8 feet set back from the sidewalk. These are on the sidewalk, and yet this is 2 doors down, 3 doors down south of us. And yet the staff finding is that our steps 8 foot off the sidewalk interfere with pedestrian use of the sidewalk. I challenge you to disregard that fact and not approve it, because it doesn't make sense. I'm sorry, it just doesn't. Now, as to the, now, I do not want to be misunderstood. That you might have approved another variance or that other properties have structures does not say this has to be approved. That's not true. I understand there's no precedential value in a BZA variance decision. They all stand alone. But what I do urge is that because these other things exist and you can examine that, it allows you to find that this variance would not cause harm, that these do not interfere. You just look around, and the one at 619 North Washington Street, it's a huge deck. It wraps around the structure. It's closer than what this is. And yet, historically, there's no evidence that that has caused a problem, caused injury, has interfered with traffic, interfered with pedestrian use. So while those structures, whether they are permitted or not, I don't know. I'm not trying to cause anybody trouble. It may be perfectly permitted. But the simple reality is, the simple truth is, it's evidence that this deck and these stairs will not cause injury, or there's no evidence to support they would cause injury when you have examples surrounding this property, every direction of structures, steps, decks, porches, railings that are closer to the sidewalks and the pedestrian use than what these are. So I would ask you that you disregard the staff's finding, in fact, on number one, on the injury issue. Now, this is the Lincoln Street side. The Cottage Grove side is a much different story. There you've got a structure that was built decades before anybody ever worried about it. I don't know if the sidewalk even existed on Cottage Grove at the time. I suspect it didn't, not given the year of construction, that it came in later. But it's an existing condition. So the real issue there, I think, is going to be the issue of practical difficulties. Now, and that's why I object to the use of the term unique, because that's not the standard. And you're also, when it's being read to you and explained to you, it was stated that this variance would not relieve the peculiar conditions. That's not the criteria. Again, it's set out verbatim. The legal criteria is in your packet. You put it on the screen. It'll probably come back up again. But number 3 doesn't say relieve the conditions, because you can't. No variance is going to relieve the condition of the existing structure built just a couple feet off of what is now the sidewalk. So no, it's not. Nothing's going to relieve that. You can't move the structure. There's not room, and it can't be done. It was built. Probably there's structures all over that neighborhood, as you see, that don't meet those setbacks. Don't meet the 20. What he said was 22-foot setback on Lincoln Street. You can't find a structure on Lincoln Street 22 feet back in this block. But regardless, so if you go back to the peculiar conditions, the practical difficulties, which is what the standard is. The irony of this petition, to me, is the last time I was here a couple months ago, 3 months ago, I think it was, we were meeting in this room at that time. Joe Hoffman spoke up on regard to another petition and offered some comments with regard to, as examples, variances on setbacks for constructing carports. And those have been granted numerous times. In fact, some of them become so routine, I think we're often seeing those going to the hearing officer and not even coming to you. Now, because you have approved, or the hearing officer has approved a variance for a setback violation to construct a carport, does that mean this has to be approved? No. But what it does tell you is that this BZA and the hearing officer have recognized the practical difficulties with some of the older neighborhood structures built at a time when setbacks were not the issue, or built at a time when we weren't building garages and carports. They were out there, and it's the practical difficulty that you can't do anything about that now. You can't move the location of the house, the residential structure, and yet it's a reasonable use to add a carport to the property. That's exactly the situation here. So while those approvals don't say this has to be approved, the rationale and the analysis on those fits here and would allow you, and I would suggest should cause you to approve this one for the same reason. I want to go on to then the impervious surface. We have a disagreement on whether this deck is an impervious surface issue. First of all, I want to read from the ordinance. This is the UDO definition of impervious surface, a percentage of the area that's covered by an impervious surface. Impervious surface means any surface artificially covered or hardened so as to prevent or impede the percolation or absorption of water into the ground, including but not limited to asphalt, concrete, roofing material, brick, plastic, gravel, or swimming pools. Now, I understand that says including but not limited to, so it's not an exhaustive list, but it is interesting that it says nothing about wood. So there's nothing about deck materials. It wasn't even an example. Now, you may or may not have, well, Mr. Whistler would have been involved in plan commission meetings where you're looking at development plans and impervious surface, and the number of times that impervious surface issues are satisfied by what's called impervious pavers. Impervious pavers do allow some penetration, but they do hinder absorption. They still allow it, and it's an acceptable alternative. If you go back to the pictures of the deck, this deck is elevated from the ground. These are planks. One of the other, please. But it should have been one with that showed the full deck from the side. Yeah, those are fine. Thanks. Thank you. You can see the deck surface is planks. They're spacing. There will be water penetrating through the deck to the ground below to allow water absorption. If these are viewed to hinder, they cannot be viewed as hindering any more than pervious pavers do, because pervious pavers are a hardened material. They just are porous by design to allow for some penetration. The wood itself actually would hinder. I would suggest it allows penetration. The wood does not repel water. It allows some penetration. But even the deck structure with the planks and the spacing in between planks allows for water to penetrate through into the ground below. And there's one picture from under the deck that demonstrates that. With the deck in place, you can still see under the edge of the deck. I'm sorry, the last one I think you probably had up there. There we go. It's shadowed down there, so it's a little hard to see. But there's grass growing under this deck, not under it. A lot of that area on the deck are the oldest, the concrete block steps. They're still under the deck. It was built over it. So that hard and impervious surface is still there. So as to the rest of the deck, it's clear from this picture that water's coming through and it can absorb there. I would disagree there's an impervious surface issue at all. But to the extent that you find that there's at least some increase in impervious surface, we have 4 deck posts. Okay, fine. They're solid into the ground. We have 4 deck posts. There's less than 1%, a 0.5% increase. It's de minimis and would suggest it should not even require variance. But to the extent it is, it's that structure, that minimal interference, or very minimal hindrance or interference with absorption of water is necessary to overcome the practical difficulties of a reasonable residential use of the property. It's interesting that this is to deny a deck. It wasn't that many years ago the Plan Commission was pushing as a development standard, we need to be adding front porches. We don't have people walking neighborhoods anymore. We encourage front porches and people and try to get back to a community and neighborhoods. And yet this house had no porch. It's pretty much of a pillbox when constructed. At the time, perfectly acceptable. It's perfectly acceptable to add a deck to it now as a reasonable residential use of the property. That's not possible without the variance because of the practical difficulties of the location of the house already on the structure on the ground and the variance on the setback. And I would suggest that the variance of the setback is almost a non-issue when you look at every other property already encroaches further than what within this same block that these structures do. But it would ask that you find that there is no injury caused by this to the public, to do good, and that there are practical difficulties that the variance overcomes that by allowing the deck to be constructed as it is. It is an after the fact. This is not an enforcement issue in that sense, but it is certainly after the fact. And Mr. McLaughlin tried to explain in his statement how he got to that point. Thank you. Question?
Okay, thank you. Questions for staff or petitioner?
You want to go first?
I can.
Go ahead.
Staff, could you comment on the impervious surface question? Is it true that that decking is not specifically in the code defined as impervious surface?
So decks and decking material is not listed in the definition of impervious surface. However, it does say any artificially put or hardened surface which prevents or impedes percolation. It would staff's contention that any block of wood would impede penetration into the ground from water.
But that's an interpretation, not something that's,
It's a consistency. It's been that way as long as this UDO has been adopted. The current.
that's consistently been the staff's interpretation.
Correct. Yes.
But it is staff's interpretation as opposed to something that is codified.
Sure, so, well, kind of on the flip side of that, the UDO specifically calls out permeable pavers and allows those to be counted in your, not against your impervious count. That's the only thing it allows. So yes, decks are not specifically mentioned, houses are not specifically mentioned, other things that aren't permeable are not specifically mentioned. But yes, that is an interpretation and has been the way that has been done since the UDO came into place.
Thanks.
So just to follow up, when you do impervious surface calculations, you regularly take decks into account?
Yes, decks, yes. Mhm.
Okay. Could you speak a little to the stair issue? How those factor into front setbacks?
So stairs are allowed to encroach, stairs specifically, not decks, are allowed to encroach into any setback up to 6 feet. Because of the location of the deck, the stairs encroach past that 50 or that 22 feet and well past their 6-foot allotment of encroachment. So their full 4 feet 3 inches is counted as an encroachment into the front setback along Lincoln.
And so the distinction you're making when there's steps that are in the front setback, say that as you there are many situations where we don't step down all at once in one run, but rather that's kind of parsed out. It's because it's connected to the structure. That's how you look at this differently.
Correct. Yeah. Stairs or steps are their own defined.
Rather than things in the landscape.
Exactly.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions?
Sure. I just want to be clear. First of all, I would like to make just a statement before I ask the question, which is I would like to thank the petitioner's representative for being so well prepared and understanding that precedent is not set by any decisions made by the BZA. That's typically a thing that we fight. So I appreciate, and I know that you've been here before us before, and thank you for making those statements in your statement. I want to go back to something that you said. I want to make sure I understand this, or if you could explain it a little further. There was mention made that the city was contacted before this was put up. Could the
building department see if he had a building permit, and given the size, he did not. Building is 120 square feet involved, and so he did not need a building permit. Part of what he's trying to say in his statement, he didn't ask any further questions, nor did they volunteer, but there might be other criteria, but I wouldn't expect the building department to do that, frankly. That's just not what they do.
And then following that goes to staff, which is building permits. They would not typically ask questions about setbacks and other issues. Is that correct?
That is correct. The building department does not consider those.
If I understand that statement, then the petitioner had asked, this is the size of a deck I'm building, is that a problem? The building department said, no, it's not, you don't need a permit. However, there was no further investigation as to setbacks and other things that was required from another department.
Correct, yeah, they wouldn't know that. Also, just for the record, I believe the height is the determining factor for a building permit. I think this is below the height rather than the size.
Okay, so, I didn't quite gather that, but it does relate to my next question to you, which is, there is some mention about possibly impeding vehicular sightlines. Okay, so with that, how did you determine that this particular structure may impede the sightline from Cottage Grove, and I'm assuming in particular turning right onto Lincoln.
So it wouldn't, Lincoln is one way north, or Lincoln is
Okay,
one way
I'm sorry.
north, and
Okay.
Cottage
But
Grove is
turning
one way
onto it from
east.
Cottage, right? You
Yeah,
have to
so
look
you
right
wouldn't-
to go left.
No one from Lincoln should be turning left onto Cottage Grove.
No, I'm talking
or,
about
sorry.
if you're on Cottage
Right.
Grove, which way does that go? Does that go,
Goes
It-
east.
Yes,
so it's a one-way?
yes.
Okay, so then with that understanding, I'm not really that familiar with those roads there, but how did you determine that that particular structure was impeding vehicular
So
sightlines?
potentially impeding. So it's the combination of the encroachment towards Cottage Grove with the encroachment towards North Lincoln. The fact that it has two frontages would increase the amount of covered area. You can see in this photo a bit. It's not exactly from the right of way, but you can see that it makes the sidewalk difficult to see. And then also with that, Cottage Grove is disjointed at its intersection with Lincoln. The westernmost portion is significantly about 22 feet further south than the easternmost portion. So it's already a tricky intersection for pedestrians. There's no stop sign along Lincoln there. So there's
Right,
that
so
combination.
you're coming north on Lincoln and you want to turn left on Cottage Grove, right?
Yeah.
This is what you're saying, and you can't necessarily see pedestrians.
Correct.
Okay, now let me ask you, from that corner, that Cottage Grove corner, if a pedestrian were to come to that corner and proceed directly across Lincoln, is there also a street cut out there, or would that be crossing into the middle of a block?
So you would be crossing, if you're on the north end of Cottage Grove, you would be crossing to the south version of Cottage Grove sidewalk. And then if you were on the south version of the west side, you would be crossing into the middle of the block.
And I guess my point there is it's not really lined up.
No, it's disjointed for sure.
Right.
It's a job.
It's an odd intersection anyway, so that's it. And also it was mentioned in this report by staff that there was a complaint that was issued, but I kind of scrolled through there, I did not see the indication of what that complaint was. Is that something you can share with us?
The complaint, I believe, I didn't receive it, but I believe it had to do with the encroachment into the front setbacks was the major point of contention, as well as impervious surface. It's the two things that are touched on in the variance request.
And was it neighborly, or was
Yes,
the complaint from a neighbor?
I believe it was from an abutting neighbor, yes, to the south.
I'll ask the petitioner, are you aware of any complaints about this structure?
Well, I know who made the complaint because I talked to him and by happenstance. Happens to be a friend of mine, and he's also an attorney. And I was talking to him about some other matters. We got talking about zoning matters, and I know he owns property in this neighborhood. And so I asked him about it. And I said, and he said, well, I was the complainant. And so, why'd you complain? He says, people need to learn to draw the permits. That was his comment to me. So he did not, he may have other complaints. That's the only thing he said to me, nothing specific about the deck or the steps or safety or anything. His statement was, I'm tired of people not drawing permits they need. Well, I think he thought he needed a building permit, but that's beside the point. That was the statement.
Thank you. Back to the staff. The petitioner had mentioned a number of times, 615, I believe, is the address, that structure, the stairs come out quite a ways. I think you have a picture of it, the red stairs that you showed us a number of times, comes out. How is this existing structure different, or is this also a structure that the city believes is in violation?
So this structure is pre-UDO. It did not have to conform to the same setback standards. The new deck.
It was grandfathered in?
Correct.
Okay. And now I'll just ask the question, if it had not been grandfathered in, would this be in violation?
It would be, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Cassandra, any questions?
So I understand that we're not looking at peculiar conditions specifically. We're looking more at practical difficulties. based on strict application of the UDO. However, later on, you do mention peculiar conditions that it would not alleviate. This property is, if I'm looking at the, significantly smaller than the vast majority of the properties in the neighborhood. I do see that there are some other small corner lots, but the amount of land you have there to consider in percentage of impervious surface and for setbacks is quite a bit less than the norm. Is that?
It is smaller than the newly divided minimum lot size for the district.
And would that not be considered a peculiar condition to the property?
You're asking if what the fact that it's smaller than the minimum lot size for the zoning district could be considered a peculiar condition?
Yeah.
Sorry, I just want to make sure.
Yeah.
Yes, we have considered that, I think, in the past. It's hard because that's less a physical characteristic of the property than its relationship to the code. And in this area, though it is zoned RM, hold on, let me see. There are other comparable single-family lots and smaller in the immediate area. It's not like a sea of lots that meet RM, and then this lot is like a remainder.
And the fact that it has two frontages, that it's on a corner?
Yes, so in some ways, yes, that is unique. In other ways, every block has four corner lots. So depending on how the request specifically interacts with the fact that it's a corner, sometimes we have considered that, yes.
Okay. And the impervious surface, in considering that or making the rule that the decks would be included in impervious surface coverage, was that mostly because of the idea of new construction and that you don't want to have to go through trying to figure out what material this is it really going to block water? Or would you actually have the opinion that a slatted or a plank deck like this really does have a negative effect on the land in the same way that impervious surface does?
Sure. So I think part of it is it's slatted now. So yes, water will trickle through the slats. If they put an outdoor rug on it, is that going to function in the same way? I mean, we have to draw a line somewhere, and the line is that if you're developing on the property, putting something over the earth. When I started here a number of years ago, something that you would hear planners say in this context would be, some people have like a second-story deck where it's completely open underneath. They have grass, the sunlight hits it, the rain hits it. That they would not count that against because the earth is there and it's able to collect, water. You could grow things there. In these cases where you're covering up the ground where nothing could live there, you're hindering the access of the water, and then that's always been counted against.
Okay, but it really is about the water getting to the land, not about something growing there or about what might live there.
There are lots of positives for having open space. So one of them is water percolation. Other one is some of the other things that you've mentioned.
Okay.
So we want each site to have that, and then we have established a minimum of what that should be. Yeah.
Okay. And I don't mean to beat a dead horse about the injury, but I drove through there today, and I don't understand the reason. I didn't see any issues with sight lines being blocked. I didn't see, even if there were a pedestrian walking across. So I'm still really not understanding why it was considered to be injurious with regard to traffic.
Sure. So, this one is a little bit borderline for us as well. We've talked about that with Mr. Carmen. But we do think that the regulations are in place for a reason. Some of those reasons are for protections of pedestrians, to be able to see, and so that a vehicular occupant could see a pedestrian. In this case, In this case, I think being a corner lot kind of works against them a little bit because, you've mentioned the lots to the south, or Mr. Throckmorton asked, would that also not meet code? No, it wouldn't meet code. Would that be a little less of a red flag for us? Maybe, because it's not actually at the corner where this could cause, where this does kind of cause some concern for us. Yeah, it's not a humongous deck, but like Mr. Carmen has brought up in other hearings about the, carports that Mr. Hoffman brought up in November, I believe it was. And yes, we have done variances for that. Those typically are on side or rear yards, something that is a very typical accessory structure. Decks are also accessory structures. I would say that I'm pretty confident if we went back and looked at how many carports we've approved, we're not approving carports in the 2 front yards at the corner of a property. It is different. It is a feature that maybe just doesn't fit on this particular site. And so then it'll be up to you guys to decide if that's because the site is so unique that's something that they should be allowed to do as customarily incidental.
Okay, and one more question. As this is zoned residential multifamily, right? I just want to make sure
Did you say multifamily?
Yeah.
Yes.
RM. And we were talking about the use of the property. Sorry, give me a second here to find it. Okay, decks are a common building feature on residential properties, but they're incidental. When you say residential properties there, do you also include rental properties, multifamily properties, or does that imply single-family use?
Nope, residential for us just always means.
Okay. As an appraiser, I've noticed there's actually a line on an appraisal form for whether or not there's a deck or a porch or some type of structure, and your value does change based on that. And it's particularly important to rental use to have some type of outdoor recreational space, as almost every one of those other properties do in the neighborhood. So I'm wondering if there's, and I think most of them are rentals. I know we don't know which ones are and which ones aren't, but I wonder if there also might be some consideration for the fact that it would affect the value of a rental property by not being able to have a deck. And I think that's all my questions and thoughts for now.
I'll just jump in on that. We often have that question about value or something that's injurious to the homeowner because of a drop in value or a lack of added value. But monetary hardships to the homeowner or the property owner are not something that we can take into consideration when making a decision. Otherwise, people would build extremely expensive items onto their home and then say, hey, well, this is too expensive, and so you should give us a variance. So while I appreciate that sentiment, while it may add value to the home, that's not something that we can consider in terms of approving the petition. However, I do have a question about this particular structure, which is you had mentioned that stairways are not part of the figure of determining the square footage. What of this structure would actually be allowed? The steps and a small landing of some size, no landing at all? What exactly could this homeowner or property owner make available to the person coming into this door in terms of a safe ingress and egress?
So the building is at the 22-foot setback, so steps would be allowed to encroach 6 feet, so he could have steps as long as they were covering the already impervious surface.
Okay, but I do want to take one more leap here, which is steps are allowed. Is there definitions as to how big the final step may be before you enter the door? Because I understand what the homeowner is attempting to provide, which is a safe and secure entry and exit from the home. So do we have a regulation for that?
There is no regulation.
Okay, thank you.
The typical definition of step is what we would consider
A standard
step.
tread,
Yes.
standard depth, standard width.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone from the public like to speak to this petition? Is anybody here who would like to speak to this petition? Please step to the lectern. And tell us your name.
My name's James Ford.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, you have 5 minutes.
I live in High Point, which is the neighborhood just north of this. This is at the juncture between Hunter Addition and the original Cottage Grove. This house was put up in the 1890s, by the way. And the tax purposes, they sometimes have the wrong years. This house originally did have a porch. It has been taken out or it's been enclosed and is now used for rental property. So there would have been a landing at the top of the original steps where they would have stepped onto. It would be a significant change to restore that original porch. And that original porch had 2 doors, one to the main room and one to the parlor. You'll notice that many houses in the neighborhood do retain the original porch. A porch and a deck are different. And yes, I think it's nice to have a porch. My house has a porch, and I have 2 front doors, front door into the parlor. In defense of the property owner, the house next door to it, just south of it, is an egregious violation with that staircase going up the front. It is old. It's been there a long time. And if he were not aware of any other regulations and looked at that and said, well, mine is much less offensive than that, it's fine. But just because somebody down the street is violating something doesn't, in my mind, doesn't give license to you to violate a regulation. There's been a reference to a deck on Washington Street, a block away. The original property owner there made a larger deck. We complained to the city, and he was forced to take it back. These are the only 2 properties in the entire neighborhood where there's been a problem with decks or with this staircase. So the idea that many properties in the neighborhood have such constructions is incorrect. In my mind, a deck, I'm not an attorney, by the way, so if I use a word wrong, I'm sorry. In my mind, a deck is something that belongs in the back of a house for you to enjoy your backyard. Of course, not everybody has a backyard, but a porch is something for the front yard. I don't know about sight lines. I walk and ride my bicycle, so it doesn't affect me. What does affect me is the fact that there are many properties in the neighborhood, over 90% are student rentals. And we, the property owners, have to be continuously vigilant to make sure that rental properties don't get more and more party accessible. And this, when I first saw this going up, I was struck, but I was concerned. I am the one who originally called. It was not, the deck was not up. They had delivered the wood, and I called the county building. I said, did they have a permit for this? They said, we don't know. We'll go out and we'll check on it. So I don't know that this property owner contacted them. They may have contacted him after my initial complaint. The formal complaint that was made to the city was done by another member, another resident of the neighborhood who is an attorney, and he knows about these things. All the things I wanted to say, and I've forgotten all of them. I hope that the property owner considers redoing this because it looks tacky, and I'm really envious of West 6th Street. I remember 30 years ago it was a dump, and now it's beautiful, and it's because people have stuck to code and tried to make it a neighborhood. And I'm always hopeful that over the years in the future that slowly these houses will maybe become more neighborly rather than marketable to students and renters. Maybe if this were more symmetric, I might not be so offended by it. Maybe if it weren't so close to Cottage Grove, and yes, it is too close to Cottage Grove, but that's when the house was built. Actually, Cottage Grove was a little bit further away originally in the 1890s. I guess I have no more to say except that I think it looks terrible the way it is, and I don't know about impervious surfaces. I think impervious surfaces are ones where plants can't grow, and if you cover it with a deck, maybe water can trickle through, but there's no sun and there's no plants. So it does seem to be well, at least impervious to light, if not impervious to water. The other comment was about setbacks. again, that's more of a legal thing. I don't really understand it. So this is more of a stylistic complaint I have, and I hope I don't even know if you can consider that in your deliberations, but I hope that you do if you can. Thank you.
Thank you.
You have to write my name?
Thank you. Anyone else from the public who would like to speak to this petition? Okay. We'll wait a moment. I don't know how much time the petitioner has remaining.
2 minutes, 45 seconds.
If you have any final
Oh,
comments?
1 minute, 45 seconds.
Only need 1
1
minute. Okay. I'm glad that the standards for variance aren't dependent upon subjective aesthetic considerations, because while he finds it tacky, I think it looks great, but neither one of our opinions on that are really relevant to your decision, so that's aside. And it's probably lucky that we have an ordinance that has specific definitions, because impervious to one person is different than what's impervious to Jackie, which is different than what the ordinance says, which says blocks or hinders. And this doesn't hinder the absorption of water. It allows the absorption of water. If this were flush to the ground, different story, but it isn't. And those matters are not problems. And as for the just the overall issue, well, I'm not going to repeat myself, so I'll just stop with, if you look at the property, it does no harm. It's an added to value to the property, not just for the sake of the property owner, but it's an improvement to the property, I think, for the neighborhood. But again, now we're getting back to subjective things again. But it does no harm, it does no injury, and nothing can be done. You heard Ryan say that front of the building is 22 feet. Nothing can be done to the property other than steps without a variance.
Thank you. Okay. We are now back to the board for action. I want to just make a comment first, and that is I find this to be a particularly unfortunate case because I think in the right circumstances, variances for this property, I think, could be granted. The petitioner called the building department, and unfortunately, that was the wrong body to make an inquiry about this type of project. So I do feel for the petitioner, because I do feel, sometimes people come to us and they didn't make any phone calls. So I completely recognize that. I have to say that the issue of the deck is not a small one, because our code specifically allows encroachments of decks on the side and in the back and not on the front, because I think it says that decks are not appropriate in the front yard. We happen to be in a core neighborhood, a historic neighborhood, and given the context, I think that my opinion is that it's particularly not appropriate here. So while I think that there is a project that would allow for a modest entry that would not impede views, et cetera, I don't think that this is it. And the process of a variance and working through that with staff where you can get guidance so that you can meet the spirit and the intention of the code was unfortunately didn't happen here. It was circumvented. That process did not happen, and so we are left with a deck that is not conforming and has some potential safety issues with it. So I wanted to say that because I find that this is kind of an unfortunate circumstance in the way that this came to be. So in any case, that's kind of my starting point and why I will support the recommendation from, based on the written findings as they are.
We're back to.
And I'll entertain a motion if anybody's ready to do that. One way or the other.
Okay. I move for the denial of V-44-19 based on the findings presented to us by staff.
Do I have a second? I'll second it. Okay, discussion?
Sure. Yeah, as it's been said, this is obviously a difficult case, and I think very borderline in a lot of ways. As I look through the three criteria, one, the approval will not be injurious to the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare of the community. I don't see this. I disagree with the staff's finding here. I mean, their staff is stating that the injury here is due to its impacts on pedestrian traffic. I think I don't see how the encroachment impacts pedestrian traffic, and I think in a lot of ways, this, you know, the connection to people that you have from having this structure on the front creates a better sense of place. It makes it more walkable. I mean, the previous entry really makes this feel like a place that is very uninviting, that you wouldn't want to walk past when you see old concrete stairs that are sinking in. It's this, you have no sense of place, and the pedestrian experience is diminished. So I think with regards to, you know, the question of injury, it's really about the impervious surface. I think there's some question as to whether this really is impervious. I mean, obviously the staff's position has been consistent. I've consistently disagreed with that opinion over the years. So, and even if you do consider this to be impervious, we're talking about a difference of 3%, and I'm not sure that really creates injury. So on the second question, the use and value of the area adjacent to the property will not be affected in an adverse manner by the granting of this variance, and there doesn't seem to be much argument on that. There's not really adverse impact to the neighborhood by this. Again, I think you could make an argument that it's improving the experience in the neighborhood. And then finally, the strict application of the UDO will result in practical difficulties. So, I mean, I think it does, right? I mean, I think we've kind of established that there isn't much that the homeowner could do here to make this entry more safe without violating the UDO. They really just, I mean, the only thing they could do is essentially cover up the existing steps, which I don't think would be safe and certainly wouldn't be appealing. So, yeah, I'm kind of leaning in favor of the variance, although it is, I think, clearly a judgment call on just about all three of the points here. So.
If any other further comments?
I would support the comments of my colleague, Mr. Whistler. I mean, I think that it's a very difficult decision. So I think it's well said. Thank you.
Anything further?
Yeah, I would agree. I have trouble with finding any injury with either the impervious surface or the setback issues and the deck encroaching into the right-of-way, especially considering the house is already further than that. I agree with staff on number 2. I think the issue is in number 3. And I do think there are practical difficulties with this particular property. And if you mentioned even going back and trying to work with staff to find something that would fit, and I think Brad's right there that there's really nothing else that they could do that would fit based on my understanding of what the regulations are here. So yeah, I would have trouble denying the petition.
I'll call the question then.
Okay. So a vote for is denial.
Husky.
No.
Clapper.
Yes.
Whistler.
No.
Throckmorton.
Yes.
Okay. So with a split vote, that means that the petition is denied. Correct?
Sorry,
No action?
no action.
Oh, it's
They can-
automatically continued?
No, you can-
Okay, my mistake.
We could still consider another
Hold on.
motion.
Okay,
It means someone can do another motion. If you are going to move to approve it, you need findings to do that because you don't have any in the
Right,
staff
right.
report. So you can direct us to modify the findings we have, and we could adopt them after the next petition if we can work on them during that, or if you have proposed findings for the decision that you're suggesting, that would be helpful. So
Right,
we'll need to
right. So
address
it's-
that if we're going to move to approve.
so if you want to, if somebody wants to move at this time, otherwise it would just be continued?
Yes.
Okay, okay. My apologies. I should have known that, because that happened before. So does somebody want to?
Come back with a hearing.
You can move to continue, if, or,
My apologies, I'm sorry. Also, if you think you're going to go 2-2 on the next vote, yes, we can just continue to the next hearing.
Right.
Until we have 5 members, which
Right.
we've done in the past.
yes. This which we might,
Yeah, I'm
Need to
gonna- I'm
do.
going to move to continue.
yeah.
Yeah, I'd
I'll
second that.
Okay. Okay. So, please call roll. Brad?
Clapper.
Yes.
Husky.
Yes.
Whistler.
Yes.
Throckmorton.
Yes.
Okay, so the petition is continued to our next meeting. Thank you. And sorry again for that miscue. Okay, what time do we have? Feels late. Do we need a break? Are we doing okay?
Yeah, let's plow through.
Huh?
Let's just plow.
Power through? Okay, we're on to petition number 3. Just let us know when you're ready. Okay.
Thank you.
Staff report, please.
Great. The next petition tonight is an administrative appeal. The property is located at 520 East 2nd Street. The case number is AA 4519, and the petitioner is Tariq Khan. The petitioner is requesting administrative appeal of the issuance of a notice of violation. The notice of violation was for work done outside of an approved certificate of zoning compliance. So the property is located at the southwest corner of Henderson and 2nd Streets. It is zoned RM, residential multifamily. There is one structure on the lot, and it is listed as contributing in the current Bloomington City Historic Sites and Structures Survey. A notice of violation was issued for noncompliance with a certificate of zoning compliance that was issued for work to be done on the building, and the petitioner appealed the notice, and that's why we're here. So a certificate of zoning compliance is basically a planning permit that is required for many building permits that go through the Monroe County Building Department. and a certificate of zoning compliance was issued for this site on November 16th of 2018. It listed 6 conditions on the permit, and the first 3 were related to limitations of work on the property. So that is relevant because the property is listed as contributing, so work over a certain threshold would have required a demolition delay review by the Bloomington Historic Preservation Commission before planning could release the certificate of zoning compliance. So the 3 conditions I mentioned, the first is, and this is in your packet as well, this permit authorizes the interior remodel as shown in the building permit. Number 2, the only exterior changes permitted to the structure is to replace existing boards on the porch. This does not permit expansion of the porch. And number 3, no new windows or doors are permitted. No changes to the footprint of the house are permitted. So the planner at the time, Ms. Lewis, included those particular conditions. 1, because we just try to be clear on the certificate what is being asked and what is being permitted. And 2, because if those thresholds were those established the threshold that had we known work was going to go over those allowances, then we would have required the demolition delay review. Because of the listing in the survey, the property would be subject to partial demolition, and this is in your packet as well. But in the definition of the Bloomington of partial demolition in the municipal code, any work resulting in the obscuring from view of 40% or more of the exterior facade on a structure, or removal or destruction of an exterior facade of 40% or more of an area of any exterior facade on the structure, and then or replacement of any window or door where the window or door opening is enlarged or obscured from view. Those two details are listed in the definition of partial demolition, and that is what happened at this site, and so we would have required demolition delay. So I have included the papers here for the application. So this is Mr. Khan's building permit application that we received from the building department on November 1st. It just says under scope of work, please see attached. And then you can see at the bottom that staff identified this. Yes, this is contributing on both historic preservation lists. And that is a note to the planner to say, hey, if this work meets definition for partial demolition, you're going to have to do demolition delay. But Mr. Khan included a list of items to be done here on the second page of the application, and none of the items would include exterior changes beyond the floorboards mentioned in the CZC. So it's all interior work, again reflected here on page 3 of his submittal, except for the boards that were to be replaced on the porch. So this is an image of the house before work began, and another image here, and then the main issue that we had work done outside of the bounds of the CZC is the southern wall, which you can see circled here in red, 3 existing windows before work was done. We received a complaint from a member of the public who is also on the Historic Preservation Commission, so knew that this property, just based on its characteristics, would very likely have to go through demolition delay if the type of work that you see here was being done. So you can see this is the western side of the property with all of the siding removed in this area. And then this is the corner as well, and you can see the roof has been taken off to be reshingled. And then all of this siding was removed as well. I'm unclear about whether or not the supporting walls underneath were removed. But this is the southern wall where the 3 windows previously were that I showed you, apparently completely removed and rebuilt. And you can kind of see that here in the next picture as well. There was some question about whether or not this window opening had been changed when we received the initial complaint. So we did a stop work order with the Monroe County Building Department to say, like, hey, let's put the brakes on this work and kind of figure out what's going on. This seems to be beyond the threshold of what you were approved to do. Mr. Khan called immediately, and I spoke with him, and he indicated that no, he did not feel that he was doing work outside of the bounds of the CZC. I hadn't visited the site myself yet, beyond just driving past it. So he had new tenants moving in less than a week. So we told him, okay, we'll lift the stop work order so that you can finish, because demolition delay, it was unlikely that demolition delay would have recommended a designation for this one house. It was a process that needed to be done, but we felt that the work had already been done to the house and it was going to go to demolition delay review if the complaint was accurate, with the work already being completed. So we told Mr. Khan he could keep working and we would verify that whether or not he had gone over what the CZC allowed. So then we went out and found the house in this state, and we did issue a notice of violation, which you can see in the email that I sent to Mr. Khan on August 16th, that we were pretty clear about what would happen if it did turn out, in fact, that he was working outside of the CZC. And then he went ahead and is appealing that to you. So per Bloomington Municipal Code, in the Unified Development Ordinance, Title 20, Chapter 10.040, we can assess fines of $25 per day. With a second or subsequent violation should be twice the previous fine. In this instance, we did not continue doubling the fines. We did a fine amount that would be equal to $250 a day from the day we received the complaint to the day that he could have gone to the Historic Preservation Commission for demolition delay review. He had to wait an additional 2 weeks because they didn't have quorum, but that was not something he could control. That's how we came to the amount. I'm mentioning that now because I'm assuming that that will kind of come up, though the amount of a violation is not the purview of this board. That is something that would have to be contested in court. So he is appealing the fact that we issued a violation, that we issued the notice of violation that he had done work outside of the bounds of certificate of zoning compliance. So we think that it's clear that he did, and we hope that you will deny the administrative appeal based on the findings in the report. Thank you.
Okay. Petitioner, please, if you could step to the lectern.
Hi, my name
Please.
is Tariq Khan. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, we can
My
hear
name
you.
is Tariq Khan.
Do you swear,
this
excuse
is-
me, sir, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the
I
truth?
do.
Okay, you have up to 20 minutes.
Okay. Yes, so this is one of the houses that I have done. I've done many, many houses. And in this case, it was a very unique situation. House was in a very bad condition. We did not know as where we were going into it. And as the things progressed, the Monroe County Department people did come, and I showed it to them. Of course, they saw the situation, and they said that yes, it's a pretty bad situation, and you can go ahead and keep doing what you're doing. And these were several times different inspectors came, and there was no problem. And I personally thought that if there was a problem proceeding, then they would have told me to go and contact some other department and get this thing fixed. But no such mention was, they didn't mention any such thing. So we kept going. The problem was that all the places that they are telling, she has shown you, the siding was either burnt or totally destroyed. The whole band of the house was, where the joists are connected, they were dangling from the ceiling and there was no connection. So the house is in a very bad condition. Was in a bad condition, and there was no reason for me to take the siding off unless I had to do that. And apparently they had been taking pictures. It would have been perfectly fine if they had told me and told me to come in and talk to them. Nobody told me any such thing, except for the very end. They called me and sent me, this inspector has just come in only half an hour before, and he came and gave me a stop work order. And I said, you were here just now? And he said, oh yeah, I have nothing to do with this. This is coming from the building department. I said, that's very strange. And he said, yeah, I don't know. I don't have any control over that either. That's when I called Jackie. So anyway, the condition was that the siding I took off was either they were Some of it was burned, and the only thing that I had was internal paneling, joists which were curved, original wood probably, and then you had plastic outside. No insulation, nothing in between. So I was compelled to do those things. I took care of everything, and all the windows were put back. The thing that I was accused was that the window was not in line because the floor, this second window on the left, this one, it is actually optical thing from outside. Inside, a window cannot go any further down because there's a floor right there. So we had to raise it a little bit. So on the back side, could you show the back side? The only thing that I did not put that window back, that I'm telling I have not put the window in, yes, window on the right, was after putting the new floor, it was so close to the flooring that it was, in the past, there have been 2 incidents in the past 5 years that people have basically broke through that window, and one guy was drunk, and he was lying in the bed, cut up in a girl's bed. So that was the only reason I did not discuss the window in question. I did not put it back in because of the security reasons. And in the past, that I have other sites that I had worked at, Nancy Heaston told me if the windows or anything is in the back, we are not concerned about that. Only the one that in the front, if you do them and if they cannot be moved or anything. So keeping that in mind, I did not put that window back. And that's the only window the other 2 windows, those were the windows I had put them some time back, and I didn't know that it's going to become such a big deal. And the top window, also the third on the top, small one, that I put that in some time back. I have this house for about 15, 20 years. So that's the only defense I have, that is that the window was too close after the new floors were put in, that it was actually presenting itself as a more security situation. Other than that, all the other windows were put back where they belonged. So I think the penalty is pretty stiff for one window. If they really want it, I can put the window back, although it is not a very good situation because the window will be presenting itself again as a security risk.
Thank you. Okay. Questions for staff or petitioner? I have one to start. And Jackie, when you showed an earlier photograph of the front of the building at the corner, there was a second entry there on the left side, and now there isn't one. When was that? Do we know, was that alteration made as part of this?
Yes, I believe so. But Mr. Khan could probably speak to that.
Mr. Khan,
but-
could you please clarify that for us? Did that second entry go away?
Yes, it is very dilapidated situation here. This is why I had taken this whole thing down over there, because there was artificially, sometime the door was added, it was lopsided. When we took this paneling off, it was they had cut in such a way that it was creating a very bad situation. The house was tilting in that direction, and it was not a good support. And the door could never open, close properly, and it was never used. There were already 2 doors in the front. Already 3 doors in this house. Mm-hmm. This is the 4th door. I mean, such a small house, a 4th door, not serving any purpose. Water is going in there, and all the stairs are tilting to the right-hand side, to the body of the house, and there was a very bad situation. And your door would not open and close properly. And it was added at some point, I don't know when, but that was a problem.
That door was added before you purchased the home?
Yes.
Okay, so this door was not added after you purchased it?
No.
Okay. And was
But that was
this,
never
this
used
was,
because
one second. So this, the building permit that was issued, this is to staff, stated that this door had to stay. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and that was clearly stated, I believe, in the document that was given to the petitioner?
Yes.
Okay, and now back to the petitioner. When did you go back and ask to have that waived?
I did not. I just had the building department people coming to get the, it was.
Oh, that's okay, so you had the building department tell you. Were you present when you received the stipulations on the construction initially? You were given that document by, which department gave it to him?
Building department. So we issue the certificate of zoning compliance, it goes back to the building department, and when the petitioner receives his building permit, it comes with a copy of our certificate as well.
Okay.
And I do not know if there were conversations had with Ms. Lewis about clarifying what was going to be in that before.
So to staff, then you did not follow up and go back to your own building department personnel and ask if these conversations were accurate?
Oh, I'm sorry. Ms. Lewis was a planning staff member. She's no longer in the department. We did not ask building department. I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Well, what I'm trying to understand is the petitioner has stated that he did inquire with building department personnel. I'm just trying to find out the veracity of that, if it's accurate.
Yes, so we did not ask. That would be typical. So they are not going to weigh in on planning issues. So because this is an issue of our condition, they will tell petitioners, like interestingly in the last case, they often do say to petitioners, you don't need a permit from us, but you should call planning because they don't know our regulations. In an inspection situation, they would not. That's not always going to happen.
Okay, and to the petitioner, we've talked a lot about the outside, and you talked about the floor moving, the floor being higher. Inside the walls in question, the door and the windows, how much did you change the interior layout of that building that you own, the home? Was it substantial, or was it exactly the same and you just covered up the window and the door?
Okay. When we started out, it was the only back third of the house. The floor was buckling and all the walls were twisted.
Mm-hmm.
So I said in the very beginning, in my appeal, that new drywall throughout the house. I have said that. So if you're going to take that inside paneling off and there is no insulation, and all you can see is the plastic, there were burnt areas. As there was a chimney, the whole side was burnt and the wood was gone. So previous owner at some point did not fix anything, they just put the plastic outside. And there was paneling inside, that's all there was to it. So when I take everything down, the back third of the house that I was gonna change, the flooring, that was all buckled up and pretty bad shape. Especially that door, that was buckling up like this. So there was a reason that the water was coming in from the top and inside. And trees had fallen on top, so that's why if you put the picture up.
Well, I appreciate and understand the issues you had with the walls. What I'm asking is, did you make any changes to the interior layout of the home during this construction?
Practically the same thing. The only thing is that I have changed is maybe reduce the size of the kitchen. That's all I've done. That's it. There's no other change.
Okay, so this piece right here, Jackie, that you're showing me, so this is, what's the change there that I'm looking at?
This is the interior site plan that Mr. Khan submitted with his building permit, and he's showing that he's expanding this bathroom, the width of the bathroom, and reducing the width of the kitchen.
Okay, and does that room itself have any connection to the door or the window that's been changed?
So the windows are along this back wall here.
Okay, and so...
This is the southern wall.
That's the southern wall.
All right, so the window that's no longer there, where would that window now be if it was to be replaced?
Let me show you, hold on.
With the
No,
scratch.
I'm
So
talking
this
about
would
on
still
the-
be kitchen, okay.
Yeah, but I'm saying on the floor plan, I'm trying to get an
Sure.
understanding as to why the window wasn't replaced, whether it was because
In
of the
this
move.
area, in the
No, other side. The bedroom.
Not the large.
Here.
Yeah, so there was a window in the bedroom, that's the one that he's talking about being very close to the ground. Then there's a double window that was smaller and higher up, that would have been the kitchen. And then there's a third, very small window, quite raised, that would have
Okay,
been
if
in
you
the
go to
bathroom.
Right
Right.
line, right
Uh-huh.
over there, and the kitchen, around the kitchen. I put those windows here, where the dot is.
Understood, those two there.
Yes.
But the wall moved from the dotted line, it moved over to the left, to the solid line, correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, those windows are here, on the other side.
Thank you. So Jackie, from the report, it says that you spoke to Mr. Khan. So there was a stop work order because there was acknowledgement that work was being done outside the bounds of what had been approved previously, and that Mr. Khan called the department after the stop order was put in place.
That
and-
was 1 week before the whole thing was ready
Excuse
to
me, sir.
complete.
Excuse me, sir. And then at that time, he insisted that no changes were being made to the exterior?
Yes, so so we spoke on the phone, and then I emailed him the next day, just so there would be record of, what we talked about, and that's in your packet here.
Right.
Yes, he stated no exterior changes outside of the approved CZC work had been done. That seemed incredibly unlikely to me from the pictures that had been submitted by the member of the public, but, knowing the timeline that he was under and that the repercussions of what he had done would be the same whether or not he finished the work
Right.
now or in 3 months. That's why we decided to let him go
But because of
ahead.
his assurances?
Yes.
You decided to basically release the work order?
Yeah, it was a
stoppage.
combination of things. We knew he had parties moving in. And
Right.
again, that we would still be able to issue an NOV were that to end up being untrue.
Okay.
I was pretty sure it was untrue.
It was going to be untrue.
But they had like 5 days left of work. or
Okay.
Something along those
Okay,
lines.
so you decided at that point just to let him finish?
Yeah, not
Okay.
worth it to hold up finishing, to go through the demolition delay process, which because of the time of year and did end up happening to Mr. Khan, sometimes they cancel those meetings for lack of quorum,
Sure.
to not have that all be hinging on that.
Okay.
Can I jump in here because it'll help me to understand and place your questions in the right order in my head. This is my first administrative appeal I've been on, so I'm really trying to understand what our role is here. And what I mean by that is it sounds like he clearly violated the CZC. However, there was an obvious misunderstanding. I can see how if the person who's delivering is it a CZC? Am I saying that right?
Uh-huh.
The person who's delivering it is then also coming back and saying, oh, this is fine, this is fine. I can see how there could be a misunderstanding there. So are we just supposed to decide whether there seems reason that it was okay that he did what he did, or are we just saying, no, obviously he violated it and therefore?
Sure, so Mr. Rooker can clarify if I say this incorrectly, but my understanding is your role is he is appealing that we should not have issued that notice of violation, that he did not violate his CZC. And so you are either agreeing with us or disagreeing with us. We are
Where-
saying he violated his CZC, that's what the notice of violation says. And then it's your role to agree or disagree.
I guess what is the criteria? Where would we have room to disagree?
Well, Michael Rooker, I'm the city attorney for the city. You have the authority to do that on any basis you would feel is appropriate. You can't modify, as Jackie said, your role is not to modify the fines or change the fines that are assessed. That's something that would be done subsequently. But other than that, you're the administrative body reviewing this NOV and the appeal of the NOV, so you have a great deal of authority.
So unlike the other types of cases that we hear, there are no set criteria for deciding whether or not there was a violation.
Right, so there's not a set group of findings. So the notice of violation that he was issued, there is a table in the code about what violations we can issue for, and his was for failure to comply with his CZC. And so he is saying that, no, he did comply with it, and you would be deciding whether or not you agree with that. Administrative appeals are wide-reaching, so this type, like there may be others where you might feel you had more discretion on if someone was appealing a decision that we made, from staff's point of view, this one is pretty cut and dry, but obviously, Mr. Khan would hope that you would disagree with that.
Okay, thank you. Anybody who's had some experience with this want to weigh in?
They're all different.
Okay.
I think Mr. Whistler may have.
Yeah, I guess a question for Mr. Khan. Were you delivered this certificate of zoning compliance prior to your construction?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Did you receive this
Yes,
certificate of zoning
yes,
compliance?
yes,
And you read it?
Yes.
And in number 2, it says, "The only exterior changes permitted to the structure is to replace existing boards on the porch." How did you read that and still come to the conclusion that you could
There was no
move?
expansion of the porch. I didn't expand the porch.
No, it says the only exterior changes permitted to the structure
Oh,
is
okay.
to replace existing boards on the porch. I would read that to mean you can't make any changes to the exterior of the home except to replace those boards. How did you interpret that to give you permission to move windows and replace siding?
Just one window in the back. And that I was understanding, I thought, was that it's in the back and it's not going to make any difference because in the past I have done many houses in which they did not care about the back windows. And it was,
What about the door?
door, yes. Door was.
That's two things.
Okay, yeah, I grant you. They were not counting doors, so I didn't bring it up, but that's fine.
And
Yes,
what about the
door.
siding? You took all the siding off.
Oh, siding, I had to change the siding. I mean, I take it off, but I put the siding back as it was. Exact same place. And the joists are not connected, and they are just dangling in the air, and the band is rotted out completely.
Yeah.
In
So-
order to fix that, I have to take the siding off. Then I put it back, and it was back to where it was.
I understand why you thought you needed to do the work.
Right.
What I don't understand is why you thought you could do it without violating the CZC.
This is the problem. This is the gap that between, I thought that when I'm talking to the building department and they say, you do what you have to do, and there have been 5 different visits.
So,
I understood that it's just one body, okay? And they are the one I got the permit from. They're gonna come in first and they're gonna stop me if they have to do that.
so your understanding was that the word of the building department inspector on site superseded whatever was in
Because
this
it was a
document?
very strange situation. We did not anticipate that. I did not anticipate that everything would be rotten and burned.
I understand that. I
And the siding was
understand
burnt
that.
inside.
I understand why you thought you needed
Yeah,
to do
yeah.
the work. I want to understand why you thought you had permission to do the work. That's what that's
Every
my
step of
question.
the way, we talked to them, and they told us do what to do and how much wood to be used and how to, there have been many visits. So that's what I understood, that I am complying with everything.
Okay.
And the CZC was delivered by the same personnel in the building department who were doing the inspections?
It's not delivered, so when a building permit is prepared, the building department has to wait for our CZC to be issued, and then they contact the petitioner who comes and picks it up at the building department and pays for it there.
At the building.
That is accurate. I mean, as Mr. Khan said himself here tonight, he has many properties in town. He is very familiar, I would say, just from my work in this department, with both departments. That's why I hesitate, or wanted to mention, I wish I could know whether or not Ms. Lewis had spoken to him. That would be common in a case where we were worried about whether or not something needed demo delay and wanted to clarify with the petitioner what work was to be done. I've spoken to Mr. Khan about numerous sites in my 5 years. It's not like, we're not like a ghost behind the curtain and no one knows we're there, and it's just the building department working with them. they are the ones who physically hand the paper to the petitioner when the building permit is issued.
Thank you. I have a better understanding.
So, Jackie, is it your understanding or belief that the remediation work that apparently was necessary to make this structure habitable and safe could have been done without violating the CDC? It didn't have to
No.
have the impact. that-
I think so what should have happened was
Yeah,
either
tell us
the
what
original
should have
permit should have
happened.
included the amount of work that was going to be done. If you open up a site and find that more work needs to be done, this happens to us.
All the time.
In very, contractors all over town, you stop and call and say, hey, I need to, do X, Y, and Z more. Do I need to do something different? You might need to amend your permit. In this case, he would have had to have gone to the Historic Preservation Commission to do much of the work that he did, remove the doors, remove the windows, even taking that siding off. We are not a body we do not staff the Historic Preservation Commission. I can say from my experience in the department that I don't think it would be likely that they would designate this one house, but for all I know, it's the most historic house in the city, and they would have done that had they known that these types of changes were going to be made. There was original siding underneath. We did get pictures from the complainant of that, and that all that stuff had
That
been
all came
removed.
off?
That's something that they consider.
Right.
So had he opened it up and realized more work needed to be done, he should have contacted the department. That would have put him behind. He would have had to have waited to do that work. So that may not have worked with the timeline that he wanted to have done. We would have tried to work with him, obviously, of course, if that was possible, but he would have had to have gone to the Historic Preservation Commission in the summer during the working season.
Right. So just to underscore, this kind of thing happens all the time, especially with
Yes.
old houses. You open things up, you find things are not what you think they are.
Yes.
And so it's a very reasonable procedure to have to check in again with HPC in
Yes, that
order to get
happens.
direction for that.
And that's why, in this case, the planner tried to be clear that what you've asked to do is fine, but I'm saying, I'm limiting that to what you've asked to do.
Right.
And I think she did a good job of doing that in the conditions that she included. I don't think they're unclear.
Okay. Thank you.
The
Oh,
The
sorry.
thing is-
You'll have an opportunity to speak in a little while. Anything else?
Can I still ask a question of the
Yes,
petitioner? Yeah.
sure.
Actually, I do have a question
She
for
has
you.
a question for you.
So in your experience with properties before then, have you dealt with the HPC and gone in front of them and gotten permission, and also
It was
through the
always-
BZA and through the?
Yeah, sorry. It was always very smooth. It was never a problem like this, ever. I have done many, many houses, okay? And demolition delay it was clear from the get-go, okay? This time, the people who came to see me, it may be very clear to her and in their department and the whole structure, how the person should move. If this happens, they should come here. It's not clear to me. It's not.
How is it different this time?
This
for-
time, the house was in a far worse condition that I've ever seen before, and all along, inspectors had been coming, and I was under the impression that everything is okay, because I had never had to go back to do anything, ever, in between. Once the permit was given, we finished the job, and they approved it. I just 607, just across the street, I did it. It's a far bigger house, 10-bedroom house. I didn't have to go through that. I didn't go in between anywhere. We said we need to fix this house. They gave a permit. The inspectors came. It's just so smooth. 10th Street, 3 houses I did, never had this problem. 418 East 9th, never had this problem. Serendipity I had the building created, never had this problem. I do not know that I had to go back. I did not know that.
On the other ones, had you gone through demolition delay on any of those?
In some, yes, but it was
And
a
others,
smooth
no?
process. I didn't have to go in after I got the permit and I had to do this. But when I was an untenable situation, and the inspectors came and they said, go ahead and do what you have to do. So I thought that I can do whatever needs to be done to save this house. It's a disaster, complete disaster the house was. I had a budget for only $20,000. I spent over $100,000 fixing the house.
Thank you.
Are we done with questions? Okay, is anybody in the public here who would like to speak to this petition? Seeing no one, we are back to the petitioner. You have some time remaining. How much?
About 15 minutes.
15 minutes? Okay, you have up to 15 minutes for any last comments?
Well, in my opinion, the stiff penalty they have put on me, it should be either removed or mitigated because I did not understand the procedure, and I did what was best for this house to be stable and not be in the situation that it was in before. I didn't anticipate, and I guess I was misguided. I know now that if this kind of thing happened, you have to go back. But how I got misled was by the inspectors. They said, you need to do what you need to do. We are fine with it. And they did not one time. All this time, I thought they will report, or if there needs to be, these guys could have, there was a long period of time, if they think I was violating, in month after 1 month I started, 2 months I started, they could have, it was very, very last moment they called me and did the stop workout. I was totally flabbergasted. That's all.
Okay, we're back to the board for action. I will entertain a motion. If anybody has anything they'd like to discuss further, questions?
Does anyone want to make a motion? Or you want me to make it a motion to act on?
Cassandra, do you want to make a motion? No? Okay.
I'll go ahead and put a motion out there that we can discuss then.
Okay.
I'll recommend denial of AA-45-19 based on the report provided to us by staff.
And I'll second that.
And then that will allow us to discuss further, yea or nay. Now, I'll jump in. I think what's interesting and should be considered in this light is that we have an experienced developer, someone who's done this before. And there is an unwritten code in town, which is just do the work, do it the way you want to do it. No one's ever going to check on you. They come back and find it later. It's very unlikely you're going to have to do anything about it. So it's that idea of don't ask questions, don't ask permission, do it, and ask forgiveness later. And I think that that's what this situation here, based on the petitioner's own words of, I've done many homes, I've done many houses, and he should know better. So I'll lay that out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's very clear that the work done here was a violation of the CZC. There's almost no question about that.
Yeah.
I think the only thing that gives me pause, that gives me sympathy in this case is that I can see how it would be confusing. If there is a government inspector standing on the site saying continue the work, I can see why that would be confusing. It is true that an experienced developer should know better and should know the difference between the building department and the city planning department as well. So, yeah, tough one.
Yeah.
And that's a point well made. I think that it, again, to go back to the kind of way things work on the street is you ask the question. Someone says, yeah, give me permission. I mean, I could ask a neighbor, hey, can I make that change to the house? The neighbor said it was okay. So I asked somebody. That's the distinction I'm drawing. If this was an inexperienced, if the petitioner were inexperienced in these matters, I would say that there's a valid issue to look at here, that there was some confusion. I think the reason that I'm leaning towards actually voting for my own motion is that the petitioner has made it very clear that they're an experienced renovator. Irregardless of the amount of money or the time, this is someone who has done, in my opinion, what many developers will do, which is they got the permit, they did whatever they wanted, and hoped that nobody found out.
No.
Jackie, our only options are yes and no. We can't modify
Correct.
anything. And has Mr. Khan been in this situation before that you know of when there was a violation like this, that he did not follow the CZC and then later got an appeal or?
I do not believe he's administratively appealed before. You'd have to ask him to verify that. And I would say you'd probably have to ask him to verify on the violations as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have we lost our opportunity to ask those questions of the petitioner? Are we past that point now?
Since Mike isn't here, that may be germane to you, but I do think, I think it kind of isn't.
I don't think it's relevant.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think it's relevant. I will say, I think demolition delay is an important process, and the Historic Preservation Commission has a role to play. While this is a contributing structure, it's on a very, very prominent corner, and we have seen some architectural elements removed after planning staff had direct communications with the petitioner and asked them and received assurances that windows and doors and such were not going to be removed. So I feel like who knows what the Historic Preservation Commission would have done, but I think that the work was clearly in violation of what was issued and the scope, which was laid out in plain language, and just the fact that the petitioners, the communication was misleading to staff whose job it is to follow up on these things and look at compliance. I have a hard time with. So for me, this is a very clear case, and I will be voting for denial. Does anybody have any other? Okay, so roll call, please.
Whistler?
So a yes is for denial.
Yes.
Throckmorton?
Yes.
Husky?
Yes.
Clapper?
Yes. So the administrative appeal is denied. And we are adjourned.